The sun beat down on the cracked earth of the Arizona desert, a relentless, unforgiving force. Jack, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles etched by a lifetime of sun and hardship, rode his old mare, Dusty, across his vast, arid ranch. The air shimmered with heat, and the only sound was the rhythmic creak of the saddle and the soft thud of Dusty's hooves on the dry ground. Jack was a man of few words, a widower who had found solace in the solitude of the desert after his wife Sarah passed away 5 years ago. His life was a simple, repetitive cycle: wake with the sun, tend to the cattle, mend fences, and sleep under a sky overflowing with stars. He was content in his loneliness, or so he told himself. He was checking the fence line near the canyon's edge when he saw it, a small, dark lump huddled under the sparse shade of a mesquite tree. He squinted, his hand a visor over his eyes. It was too small to be a coyote, too still to be a rabbit. Curiosity, a rare emotion for him, spurred him on. He nudged Dusty forward, and as they drew closer, the lump began to take shape. It was a dog, a young one, no more than a few months old. Its fur, matted with dust and blood, was the color of a burnt sienna sunset. Its ribs were starkly visible, a testament to its starvation. It was barely breathing, its shallow inhales a faint whisper in the deafening silence of the desert. A cruel act. A person had simply left it to die. A flash of righteous anger, hot and sharp, coursed through Jack. Who could do such a thing? He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. The dog's head lifted weakly, its eyes, clouded and dull, looked at him without fear, only a profound weariness. Jack knelt, a large, calloused hand reaching out. The dog didn't flinch. He gently scooped the animal up. It was shockingly light, a bundle of bone and matted fur. He held it close to his chest, its body a furnace against his own. "Hold on, little fella," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He carefully placed the dog inside his saddlebag, making a soft nest with his handkerchief. The ride back to the ranch was slow, each step a careful prayer. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. Back at the ranch, the sight of his dilapidated wooden cabin, which had always felt like a fortress against the world, now seemed to him like a sanctuary. He dismounted quickly and took the dog inside. The cabin was a single room, dominated by a large stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a small cot. He laid the dog on his bed, the softest spot he had. He brought a bowl of water, but the dog was too weak to drink. He soaked a cloth and gently dabbed its lips, watching as the animal swallowed the few drops. The dog's eyelids fluttered, a brief, silent thank you. A wave of exhaustion, both physical and emotional, washed over Jack. He sat on a worn wooden chair, watching the small, fragile life on his bed. He felt an ache he hadn't felt in years, a profound empathy for this abandoned creature. He knew he had to save it. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt a purpose beyond merely existing. He had to give this little dog a chance at life. The night was long and filled with the low whimpers of the dog, punctuated by the crackle of the fire Jack had built. He dozed fitfully, his mind on the small creature. By the first light of dawn, the dog was still alive, a faint but steady rise and fall of its chest. Jack felt a surge of relief. He knew he couldn't do this alone. The dog needed professional help, and he needed to find a vet. The nearest one was in the town of Redemption, a dusty, one-horse town, a 2-hour ride away. He saddled up Dusty, carefully wrapping the dog in a blanket and placing it back in the saddlebag. The ride to Redemption was tense. The dog's occasional whimpers were a constant reminder of its fragility. As they rode into town, the sight of the dusty main street, lined with wooden storefronts and a saloon, was a welcome sight. He tied Dusty to a hitching post outside a building with a crudely painted sign that read, "Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, Veterinary Services." The door opened to a small, clean room. The air smelled of disinfectant and hay. Behind a counter stood a woman, her hair tied in a practical bun, her face kind but serious. She had soft, intelligent eyes that held a hint of sadness. This was Elizabeth Hayes. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and soothing. I found him," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion as he carefully unwrapped the dog. "In the desert. He's in a bad way." Elizabeth's eyes widened with a mix of pity and fury as she saw the dog's condition. She gently took the animal from him, her hands surprisingly strong and deft. "Let's get him to the back," she said, her voice firm. She worked on the dog with a quiet intensity. Jack watched from the doorway, a spectator to her focused efficiency. She cleaned the wounds, gave the dog an injection, and wrapped its small body in a clean bandage. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," she explained without looking at him. "His fever is high, and he has some deep cuts, but he's a fighter. He's lucky you found him." A moment of silence hung between them. Jack felt an unusual discomfort. A man accustomed to solitude, now standing in the presence of a stranger who was seeing a vulnerability in him he rarely showed. "What's his name?" Elizabeth asked, her voice softer now. Jack looked at the small, wounded creature on her examination table. "I don't know. I haven't thought of one." "He needs one," she said with a small smile. "A good name. It's the first step to a new life." "Hope," Jack said without thinking. It felt right. A small word for a big feeling. Elizabeth's eyes met his, and a genuine smile lit up her face. "Hope it is," she said. "He's going to need all the hope he can get." She looked at Jack, a question in her gaze. "You're not going to leave him here, are you?" Jack's answer was immediate and firm. "No, I'm taking him home." The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and careful feedings. Jack learned to crush biscuits into a slurry and feed it to Hope with a spoon. Elizabeth had given him a strict regimen of medicine and instructions, which he followed to the letter. He found himself talking to the dog, a one-sided conversation that filled the silence of the cabin. "You're a stubborn little thing, aren't you?" he'd say, stroking the dog's head as it struggled to eat. "Just like me, I guess." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Hope began to improve. The fever broke, his breathing became more regular, and the light in his eyes, once so dim, began to flicker with life. One morning Jack woke to find Hope standing shakily beside his bed, his tail giving a weak, tentative wag. The moment was a jolt of pure joy. It was the first time he had seen a true sign of life, of a spirit returning. He knelt, and Hope, with a clumsy stumble, nuzzled against his hand. Jack's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't name, a profound sense of connection. The bond grew stronger each day. Hope, now able to walk, became Jack's constant shadow. He'd follow Jack on his rounds, a small, dark shape trotting faithfully behind him. He was a playful, curious dog, full of an exuberance that was a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the ranch. He was a constant source of laughter and light. Elizabeth, concerned about Hope's progress, began making weekly trips to the ranch. Her visits were a welcome interruption to Jack's routine. They would sit on the porch, sipping coffee as they watched Hope chase after a grasshopper or wrestle with a piece of rope. They talked about the ranch, about her life in town, about anything and everything. Jack learned that Elizabeth was a widow as well. Her husband, a doctor, had died in a mining accident 2 years prior. She had moved to Redemption to be closer to her family, but her family had since moved on, leaving her with her practice and a quiet loneliness of her own. Jack found himself opening up to her, sharing stories of his own life, of Sarah, of the challenges of ranching. He felt a comfortable intimacy with her he hadn't experienced in years. As Jack and Elizabeth's friendship deepened, a new shadow began to fall over the ranch. Clay Hammond, a wealthy and ambitious rancher who owned the adjacent land, had a reputation for being ruthless. He had long coveted Jack's land, which had a good water source, something he desperately needed to expand his own cattle operations. Clay had offered to buy the land before, but Jack had always refused. The ranch was his home, his legacy. He wouldn't sell it. Not for any amount of money. One afternoon, as Jack was mending a fence, he found it had been deliberately cut. The cuts were clean and professional, not the work of a wild animal. A few days later, a section of his cattle fence was torn down, and some of his cattle had wandered onto Clay's land. Clay, with a smirk, had demanded a hefty fee to return them. "This is getting out of hand, Jack," Elizabeth said, her brow furrowed with concern during one of her visits. "He's trying to force you to sell." "He can try all he wants," Jack said, his jaw set. "This ranch is not for sale." The harassment continued. One of Jack's water troughs was poisoned, and 2 of his cattle died. Hope, with a keen sense of his master's distress, would stand protectively at Jack's side, a low growl rumbling in his chest whenever they were near the border of Clay's property. The climax of Clay's campaign of intimidation came one evening when a fire broke out in Jack's hay barn. Jack and Elizabeth, who was visiting at the time, fought the blaze with buckets of water, their faces smudged with soot. They managed to save the barn, but a large portion of the hay was lost. "It wasn't an accident," Jack said, his voice tight with fury, staring at the charred remains of his hay. "The fire started in 3 different places. He's behind this." Elizabeth, her eyes full of resolve, put a hand on his shoulder. "We can't let him win, Jack. We need to find proof." The next day, Jack, Elizabeth, and Hope rode to the burned barn. Hopper, his nose to the ground, began to sniff at the burned earth, his tail wagging with a sense of purpose. He circled the area, his sniffs growing more frantic. He stopped at a patch of unburned ground, a small patch of grass just at the edge of the burned section. He began to dig furiously. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked, kneeling beside him. Hope unearthed a small, dark object. It was a metal flask, a small, intricately carved silver hip flask. "That's Clay's," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with a stunned disbelief. "I've seen him with it before. It's his initials, CH, on the bottom." The discovery was a turning point. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was a solid lead. They decided they needed more. They needed to find someone who could link the flask to the arson, someone who could testify to Clay's nefarious activities. Jack and Elizabeth began to ride into town more frequently, asking around, quietly gathering information. They discovered that Clay's foreman, a man named Jesse, had a reputation for being a bully and a drunk. They also discovered that Jesse had a deep-seated resentment for Clay, who had cheated him out of a significant sum of money in a rigged poker game. One evening, Jack and Elizabeth found Jesse at the town's saloon, a desolate figure nursing a glass of whiskey. Jack approached him cautiously. "Jesse," Jack said, his voice low and steady, "we need to talk." Jesse looked up, his eyes bleary with drink. He recognized Jack, a man he had tormented under Clay's orders. He sneered. "What do you want, old man? Come to beg for mercy?" "No," Jack said, his voice hard. "I want to offer you a chance to do the right thing. I know Clay's been causing trouble on my ranch. I know he's behind the fire. I have a feeling you know a lot more." Jesse scoffed, but the flicker of fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He knew Jack was right. The silence was thick with tension. Elizabeth, who had been standing a few feet away, stepped forward. "We can help you, Jesse," she said, her voice gentle. "We know he cheated you. We know he's a liar and a cheat. Don't let him ruin your life, too." Jesse looked from Jack to Elizabeth, a flicker of a decision in his eyes. He sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. He pulled a rolled-up piece of paper from his pocket. It was a signed confession, a detailed account of Clay's orders, the arsons, and the poisoning. Jesse had written it in a drunken fit of rage, hoping to use it against Clay someday. "He said he'd kill me if I ever spoke a word," Jesse whispered, his voice shaking. "He's a dangerous man." "You've done the right thing, Jesse," Jack said, a hand on his shoulder. Armed with Jesse's confession and the flask, Jack and Elizabeth rode to the local sheriff's office. The sheriff, a man named Thompson, was a stern but fair man. He listened intently as they laid out the evidence. "This is a serious accusation," Thompson said, his eyes scanning the confession. "Clay Hammond is a powerful man." "We have the proof, Sheriff," Elizabeth said, her voice firm. "And a witness." Thompson studied the confession for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll bring him in." The next morning, Thompson and his deputies rode to Clay's ranch. Jack and Elizabeth waited at the sheriff's office, a nervous energy filling the air. Hope, sensing the tension, lay at Jack's feet, his head on his paws. A few hours later, a wagon rattled into town. In the back, handcuffed, sat a furious Clay Hammond, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He had been apprehended without a struggle, the weight of the evidence too heavy to deny. He was escorted to the jailhouse, and as he passed the sheriff's office, his eyes met Jack's. The look was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. Jack met his gaze without flinching. Clay was convicted of arson, property damage, and cattle rustling. The judge, a man who had known Jack for years, sentenced him to a long prison term. The Hammond Ranch was seized and sold to pay for the damages he had caused. The community of Redemption, a town that had always been wary of Clay, celebrated his downfall. Jack was a hero, a symbol of a man who had stood up to a bully and won. With Clay gone, a sense of peace returned to the valley. The threat had been removed, and the future of Jack's ranch was secure. Hope, now a strong, healthy dog, was a constant source of joy. He was no longer the small, fragile creature Jack had found in the desert. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of kindness and a new life. Jack and Elizabeth's relationship blossomed. Their bond, forged in the fires of adversity, was stronger than ever. They spent their days together, riding the ranch, tending to the cattle, and simply enjoying each other's company. One evening they were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Hope was asleep at their feet, a peaceful sigh escaping his lips. "You know, Jack," Elizabeth said, her voice soft, "I never thought I'd be happy again. After George, I gave up. But you showed me there was still hope." Jack took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around her soft ones. "You did the same for me, Elizabeth. I was a man living in the past. You and Hope, you brought me back to life." Their eyes met, and in that moment a silent understanding passed between them. It was a love born of shared sorrow and mutual respect, a quiet, gentle love that felt as old and as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Elizabeth moved in, and the cabin, once a place of quiet solitude, was now filled with the warmth of two people and the playful barks of a dog. Jack and Elizabeth began to expand the ranch. They bought a few more cattle, and Elizabeth, with her medical knowledge, became the ranch's unofficial vet. They built a new barn, a larger one that could hold more hay and store more feed. Hope, now a full-grown dog, was Jack's right-hand man. He had an uncanny ability to herd the cattle, his intelligence and loyalty a constant source of amazement. He would run ahead, barking and nipping at the heels of the stragglers, bringing them back to the fold. One day, while Jack and Elizabeth were working on the fence line, a small, dusty caravan of settlers stopped at their gate. A woman, her face tired but hopeful, asked if they had any work. Jack, with a new sense of generosity, offered them work on the ranch. They were good people, hard-working and kind, and they quickly became a part of the ranch family. The ranch, once a lonely outpost, was now a thriving community, a symbol of growth and prosperity in the arid desert. Jack, who had once been a man who avoided human contact, now found himself surrounded by people he cared about. He looked at the ranch, at the men and women working with a quiet purpose, at Elizabeth laughing as she tended to a sick calf, at Hope running happily in the fields, and his heart swelled with a profound sense of gratitude. Years passed, and the ranch prospered. Jack and Elizabeth were married in a small, private ceremony, their vows a simple promise of a life together. They had no children of their own, But the people of the ranch and the young men who came to work for them became their family. Hope, now an old dog with grey fur and a limp in his hind leg, still followed Jack on his rounds. He was a constant presence, a living reminder of the day Jack had found him, a moment that had changed his life forever. Jack, now a wise and respected elder, would often tell the story of the abandoned dog to the young hands who worked on his ranch. "You see, son," he would say, his voice a gentle rumble, "the desert is a harsh place. It can strip you of everything you hold dear, but it can also show you something you never knew you needed. It can show you what it means to have hope." He would point to Hope, who would be dozing in the sun, a peaceful smile on his face. That dog. He wasn't just a dog, he was a sign that even in the darkest of places there is still hope. All you have to do is look for it. One quiet afternoon, years later, Jack sat on the porch, a blanket over his legs. Elizabeth was inside, making a pot of stew. Hope, old and tired, lay at his feet. The desert air was cool, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the mesquite trees. Jack looked at his land, a testament to a life lived with purpose. He saw the new barns, the healthy cattle, the men and women who called this place home. He felt a profound sense of peace. Hope lifted his head, a soft look in his old eyes. He nudged Jack's hand with his wet nose, a final, gentle gesture of love. Jack leaned down and scratched him behind the ears. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered. "You gave me everything." Hope closed his eyes and, with a final, peaceful sigh, passed away. Jack sat there for a long time, a tear rolling down his weathered cheek. He wasn't sad. He was grateful. He was grateful for the life Hope had given him, for the love he had found with Elizabeth, for the family he had built. Elizabeth came out and sat beside him. She saw the quiet tears in his eyes and knew. She wrapped her arm around him, and they sat in silence, watching the sun set over the desert, their hearts full of a quiet, enduring love. The story of the abandoned dog who was left to die in the desert became a legend in redemption. It was a story of kindness, of love, of resilience. It was a reminder that even in the most desolate of places, a small act of kindness can change a life, and that a glimmer of hope can tremble the world.